The morning my HOA neighbor cut a gate into my fence and started using my backyard like a shortcut to the walking trail. I learned something ugly about people. Some folks don't want a neighborhood, they want a kingdom. It was barely 6 in the morning. I was standing on my porch in sweatpants with a mug of coffee, expecting birdsong and maybe 10 quiet minutes before the day started, and instead I saw a woman in a leopard print bathrobe pointing at my fence like a battlefield commander while a construction crew unloaded a metal gate from a truck. I actually blinked twice, slow and stupid, because my brain refused to believe I was awake enough to be seeing that. And there was Karen, yes, that Karen, the one from the HOA board, the one who spoke in meeting room smiles and passive-aggressive emails, waving a stack of papers and bossing around a crew of men who looked almost as confused as I felt. By the time my coffee had gone cold in my hand, they'd already cut into the side section of my fence. 20 minutes later, they were drilling metal posts into the ground like they were installing a public entrance to a state park. And at 7 on the nose, that gate swung open with a hard metallic clang. At 8, Karen strutted through it with her teacup poodle like she'd just unlocked a VIP entrance. By 9, I understood this wasn't one more petty HOA annoyance, one more email about mulch color or holiday lights, or whether my trash cans had been visible for 18 seconds too long. This was an invasion. My dog Rocky, 90 pounds of mutt and noise and loyalty, was throwing himself at the sliding glass door like he was ready to defend the Republic. I calmed him down, set the mug on the kitchen counter, and walked outside, trying very hard not to say the first thing that came into my head. Karen was standing there beside my garden bed, watching her dog sniff around my flowers with that awful little smile she wore when she thought she was being charming. "Oh, hi," she said. "Isn't it lovely? The shortcut is going to be so convenient." I stared at her, then at the gate, then back at her. "You put a gate in my fence, into my yard." She gave a tiny shrug and lifted the papers. "Technically, it's a shared access point. The HOA has an easement clause." I took the pages from her hand and scanned them right there. They were real HOA bylaws, sure, but the clause she was pointing to had nothing to do with neighbors cutting through private property because they were too lazy to walk an extra half block. It was about utility access, buried lines, emergency maintenance, the usual dull legal stuff. Not this. I looked up at her and said, "Karen, this also says the homeowner has to be notified in writing and give written consent before any change is made to a private structure." She laughed, actually laughed, and waved one hand like I was being fussy over napkin colors. "Well, it's not like I drilled it myself. The board approved it. You weren't at the meeting. I was out of town, and I never got notice." "Exactly," she said, clapping her hands once like she'd won something. "You missed it. We assumed you wouldn't mind. It helps community flow." Right then, her poodle lifted its leg on one of my lawn ornaments, and Karen didn't even glance down. I walked back inside before I said something memorable enough to become evidence. The first person I called was my friend Luis, a college buddy who'd turned into exactly the kind of man you want in your corner when life gets weird, calm, sharp municipal attorney allergic to nonsense. I sent him photos of the gate, the workers, Karen in her bathrobe, the whole circus. 5 minutes later, he called me back, laughing so hard he had to stop and breathe. "Jason," he said, "that's not legal. That's a lawsuit in yoga pants." That helped. He told me not to tear anything down yet, to document everything. Record conversations, save emails, take pictures, let the other side keep making mistakes. So I did. That afternoon, I stood by the new gate with my phone recording in my pocket while Karen led 2 other HOA women through my grass like they were on a home and garden tour. One of them complimented my hydrangeas while stepping directly on them. Karen pointed at the opening and said, "This is so much faster than going around the block. The whole community will appreciate it." Community. That word kept bouncing around in my skull all day because there's something insulting about watching somebody steal from you while calling it neighborly. By that evening, sitting on the porch with Rocky and looking at that shiny metal gate reflecting moonlight back at me, I knew one thing: Karen thought she'd won because she thought I was the kind of person who'd rather avoid conflict than defend a boundary. That was her first mistake. Luis came over that night with property maps, code printouts, a bottle of scotch, and the kind of energy that usually means somebody is about to have a very bad week. We spread everything out across my dining room table. He showed me the property line, the violation, the exposure the HOA had just created for itself. Then, almost casually, while flipping through county building rules, he said, "You know, technically you could build a decorative wall on your side of the line. Under 8 feet, no permit. As long as it's on your property, they can't say much." I looked at him. He looked at me. And that's how the wall was born. Not metaphorically, literally. By midnight, I was researching local code like a man planning a heist. By 1 in the morning, I'd found a brick supplier. By 2, I had a commercial night crew lined up, fast, quiet, efficient, the kind of guys who normally built things behind shopping centers while the rest of us slept. I marked measurements the next day with spray chalk along the inside of my fence while pretending to garden. Karen passed through the gate that afternoon with a friend, both of them carrying smoothies and talking over each other like my backyard was a sidewalk cafe. They didn't even look at me. That sealed it. At 10:50 that night, 2 trucks rolled into my driveway with their lights off. 4 men in dark work gear stepped out carrying tools and mortar like ghosts with a business license. I led them to the side yard, showed them the line, and said, "Take the gate out first." They didn't just remove it, they erased it. By midnight, the metal was gone, the ground was leveled, and the first row of red brick was going down. The whole thing happened under work lights and whispers, mortar mixing in the dark steel supports, dropping into place, brick after brick, rising where Karen's shortcut had been. Rocky stood inside at the glass ears up, watching like he understood this was sacred work. Around 3 in the morning, the lead mason, a big guy named Derek with forearms like railroad ties, took a sip of coffee and grinned at me. "I've built walls for warehouses, clubs, even a detention center once," he said, "but never because somebody got too nosy with a poodle." I laughed harder than I had in days. By sunrise, the thing stood 8 feet tall. Red brick capped edges, iron trellis across the top, to soften the look, elegant enough to pass as landscaping, solid enough to send a message even a narcissist could understand. I'd had a small brass plaque mounted on it. Private property. Do not enter. At 7:15 sharp, Karen came around the corner with her dog and her thermos and stopped dead in her tracks. You ever see somebody's face fail to process reality in real time? It's incredible. Her mouth opened. Her dog barked. She just stood there staring at that wall like it had personally betrayed her. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and gave her a cheerful little wave. "Morning, Karen." She marched over, stopping just short of the bricks. "What is this?" "A wall," I said. "You can't do this." "Funny," I said. "That's what I was going to say about the gate." I walked down and pointed to the laminated property map I'd taped neatly beside the plaque. Her eyes jumped across the lines, then back to me, then back to the wall. She started sputtering about HOA violations, community access, shared space appearance codes. I just stood there and let her burn herself out. Then I said, "Everything about this is legal. Your gate wasn't." She turned the color of an overripe tomato, yanked her poodle's leash, and stormed off without another word. That should have been the end of it. In a sane world, it would have been. But Karen wasn't built for losing quietly. Within a day, my mailbox was stuffed with violation notices, excessive vegetation, unauthorized structure, inappropriate seasonal decor. One of them was about a Halloween gnome I'd forgotten to move. I actually admired the creativity. It takes real commitment to weaponize a lawn ornament. Luis didn't admire it nearly as much. He called it retaliation, harassment, and evidence. So I started organizing. Every photo, every email, every video clip from my camera system, every smug comment Karen had made about her community shortcut, every trespass through my yard, every citation that landed in my mailbox right after the wall went up, all of it went into a binder. And then something happened I didn't expect. The neighbors started talking. First, it was Martin from down the street, a quiet guy who gave me a thumbs up and said, "Been wanting to block her shortcut for years." Then Greg next door admitted Karen once tried to fine him over the height of his flagpole. A young couple across the street told me she'd threatened them over a bird feeder. Suddenly, my problem wasn't my problem anymore. It was a pattern. Karen hadn't just crossed my boundary, she'd been using the whole neighborhood like a chessboard for years. That was the twist. I thought I was defending my yard. Turns out I'd kicked open the door on every grudge that street had been swallowing. At the next HOA meeting, Karen arrived with a clipboard and the expression of a woman who still thought she controlled the script. Luis sat beside me in a blazer, calm as a surgeon. When Karen launched into her speech about non-compliant residents and hostile behavior, I let her finish. Then I stood up, opened the binder, and started laying out the timeline piece by piece. Unauthorized construction on private property, no notice, no consent, trespass, misuse of HOA authority, retaliatory citations. Then I played the video. There she was on screen leading a pack of women through my yard saying, "It's fine, he won't mind, he's never home anyway." The room went dead quiet. Luis followed that with the legal consequences, clean and brutal, like he was reading out weather conditions before a storm. And once the silence cracked, the neighbors piled in. Story after story. Wind chimes, bikes, pool snacks, landscaping threats, petty tyrant nonsense, years of it. By the end of the meeting, Karen's access to HOA funds was frozen. Her authority was suspended and a formal review had been opened. She walked out looking like a woman who'd just realized the stage lights were actually interrogation lamps. Still, even then, she didn't quit. A week later, my security cameras caught her creeping along the side of my yard at night, trying to pry one of the decorative caps loose from the top of the wall with some metal tools she'd brought. She got tangled in the trellis vine, nearly fell backward, then stumbled off in the dark. That clip was pure gold. Louise saw it and said, "That's attempted property damage. She's done." And she was. I filed the complaint. The board called an emergency vote. Karen was stripped of citation power, barred from meetings for 60 days, and effectively shoved out of the little empire she'd built out of forms, signatures, and other people's reluctance to push back. After that, the neighborhood changed. It was subtle at first, people lingering outside, longer porch conversations, getting easier, nobody flinching when an HOA email hit their inbox. Then one morning I looked over and saw a real estate sign in Karen's yard. That right there was the quietest victory of all. She moved out without fanfare. No apology, of course. People like that almost never apologize. The closest I got was a stiff little note saying she was seeking a community more aligned with her expectations. I laughed so hard I nearly framed it. A few weeks later, I hosted a backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers, drinks, string lights, neighbors leaning against the brick wall that started all of it. People laughed, traded stories, watched Rocky snore under a chair. And for the first time since that insane morning on my porch, the yard felt like mine again. More than that, it felt peaceful. And that's the part that stayed with me. I used to think peace was something you kept by staying agreeable, by letting small things slide by, avoiding the headache. But that whole mess taught me peace isn't always soft. Sometimes peace has to be defended. Sometimes kindness without boundaries is just permission for worse people to keep going. And sometimes the only way to stop a bully is not to scream louder than they do. It's to stand still, know your ground, and build something solid enough that their nonsense finally breaks against it. These days, the wall doesn't look like a wall anymore. The vines climbed it, flowers softened it, birds land on the trellis in the morning. It looks like it belongs there, like it was always meant to. But I know better. I know it was built one sleepless night out of anger, trespass, legal code, and the deep human desire to be left the hell alone. And honestly, it's the prettiest thing I've ever owned. So now I'm curious, how far do you think someone should be allowed to push in the name of community before fighting back stops, looking rude, and starts looking necessary? And if you've ever dealt with a Karen, an HOA, or anybody who mistook your silence for weakness, tell me what happened. I want to hear where you draw the line between being neighborly and being a doormat.